Good morning, viewers. This is the newest episode of our podcast, the Slarskey Brief. In this series, we explore hot topics in commercial litigation, the practice of law, and risk-based litigation. Today's episode is social impact litigation, doing well while doing good. Our guests are Joe Slaughter of Hunterbrook and Wang of Farah Wang. I'm Evan Freed. I'm a partner at Slarskey LLC. We're a commercial litigation firm. My practice focuses on investment frauds, business divorce, judgment enforcement. We have a substantial plaintiff practice, which includes some contingency and class action work. So let's jump into it. Joe and Times, each of you have had a very interesting path. Who are you? What's been your path? And how'd you wind up doing what you're doing now?
I'm happy to go first. I kind of fell into this line of work. And one thing I'll say is I think what we're really talking about is for-profit social impact litigation. I didn't realize that this area existed or was even possible. I started pretty traditionally, went to a big law firm called Manila after law school. And it was really when I was looking for my next job that through a recruiter, I was introduced to a firm called Cohn Milstein. And I remember very clearly on their website, they had this tagline that said, "This is the best law firm, most effective law firm in the country for cases with a social or political component." And that was super intriguing. And I took that job over a couple of other offers I had from traditional big law firms. And that's where I learned and realized that you could actually make a very good living bringing righteous cases. And then after Cohn Milstein, I started my own solo firm, taking the lessons I had learned from Cohn Milstein, how to put together complex contingent cases that have financial upside, but that also can create a social impact. And then a couple of years after that, another associate from Cohn Milstein and I started our own firm, Farah and Wang, which is where we are today.
Yeah, I had a similar, although maybe slightly more meandering path to where I'm at today. I started out of law school, like Times, as a commercial litigator at a firm called Boyce Schiller. Spent a few years there. I clerked in DC for then Judge, now Justice Jackson. Then I came back to New York and I was a white collar defense lawyer for a firm called Cobre and Kim. And in late 2016, I sort of had a light bulb moment. That firm is a great firm. They do amazing work. They do a lot of work on behalf of Russian oligarchs and Kazakh oligarchs and Ukrainian oligarchs and all the rich people of the world. And not that those people are not deserving of high quality legal representation, but I sort of thought that my talents would be better used on the other side of the V. And so I became a First Amendment lawyer at a firm called Ballard Spahr, meaning that I basically represented large media companies in any way in which their business intersected with the legal system. Often that was sort of defending defamation cases and copyright cases and various things like that, contract disputes. It was also helping journalists with their news gathering, letting them know what was legal, what they could do. Does a journalist have a right to trespass? Can you record a phone call if you're covering a protest and a cop tells you to leave? What do you do? All these sort of nitty-gritty questions. It was really fun because you get to run into court and talk about the First Amendment and constitutional issues and free speech and the founding of the country. I mean, you're like citing cases from before there was an America, right? Like that's the kind of shit you get to do as a First Amendment lawyer. Yeah, so I did that for about 6 or 7 years, loved it. That's sort of a weird defense version of doing well by doing good. I made partner at Ballard, a great group of people doing, interesting, exciting work at a time when, I think we'll talk about this later, but at a time when there's a lot of interesting and I don't know if exciting is the right adjective, but crazy stuff going on in the world of First Amendment law, in the role that the media plays in our society, and sort of working through all those issues on the legal side was really interesting. And then about a year and a half ago, I got the opportunity to join a startup called Hunterbrook Media, which is where I work now. We're an investigative journalism company, so sort of the skills that I learned representing media companies in private practice are the primary reason I got hired here. But the thing that's different about Hunterbrook, we have a different model for journalism. Rather than rely on subscriptions or eyeballs or advertising or any of the traditional ways that media companies make money. We are convinced that the information itself that we are really talented and good at uncovering has value in and of itself. And we monetize it in two ways. One is we have an affiliated investment fund that gets access to our research and reporting prior to publication and can, if it chooses to, take positions in financial markets based on that. And the other, and the business which I'm responsible for, is we partner with plaintiff side litigation firms like Times' firm, like Cohen Milstein, where he used to work, to bring impact litigation based on the things that we have uncovered in our reporting.
Well, let's talk for a second about what you're up to now and what are the types of social impact litigation that you're touching on a day-to-day basis. Joe, can you walk us through that first?
Yeah. So for me, I have sit in a little bit of a unique seat, or maybe not. Maybe I'll find out it's not unique when time starts talking. The kind of cases we pursue are all driven by what our newsroom is working on. And we have specific verticals that are our focus. Healthcare is one, housing is another, what we call habitat, meaning environmental, is another. But really, what happens is when you work in a newsroom and you do good work, which we do, you get a lot of inbound, you get a lot of tips. People find you because they want their stories told, right? And so I would say most whatever comes over the transom, I'll take a look at, the newsroom will take a look at, and we'll sort of collectively decide whether it's worth pursuing. Obviously, whether it's potential litigation is not really a consideration there. Whether it's a good story and whether it's one that hasn't been covered and whether it's one we think we can do is really what drives that. But I'm always looking at that deliberation with an eye towards, is there a potential litigation angle here? And because our broader focus, even beyond those three verticals, is on corporate wrongdoing and corruption, you know, typically where you have a corporation doing something bad and people that have been harmed by it, you have two of the key elements of a potential plaintiff side litigation. So, starting from that point, as a story develops, I'll be riding along with the newsroom and trying to figure out what the legal angles are. We do a ton just to be more concrete about it, ton in the areas of consumer protection. We often get tips of people saying things like, my bank, I signed up with this payment processor because they told me it was 2%, and now every time I get my bill, they're charging me 7%, and they won't answer their phones and blah, blah, blah. And we start looking into it, and we find 30 other people with the same story, keep looking and looking, et cetera, et cetera. Or a product, right? Products liability is another area where we find a lot of fruitful ground. We did a big story recently on a very popular insulin pump. This company sells $4 billion worth of this insulin pump a year. It's the
Yeah.
market leader by far. But online, there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people who rely on this every day, reporting problems, reporting inaccuracies, and that's the kind of thing we look at. Environmental is obviously a huge focus of ours. We find where manufacturers are polluting communities, and we partner with environmental lawyers to try to bring cases in that area. Certainly, antitrust is something that we do a ton of work on because, again, when we're uncovering corporate practices that are not quite towing the line, that can often be an antitrust problem because that's often what
Yeah.
corporations are interested in. All of the things that a corporation can do to a people are sort of our happy hunting grounds.
And how about you, Times? There's the broader umbrella of what you and your firm does, but also a specific niche. Why don't you talk about what you're up to and what the trends have been in your litigations over the past 5, 10 years?
Well, let's just start with an example of the kind of case we do. So, our highest profile case right now is probably our forced labor class action against Shenyun. And together, a lot of your audience is going to be in New York, so they're not going to be strangers to Shenyun. This hits our sweet spot in a couple of different ways. It's a human rights case. The underlying misconduct that we're suing over is egregious. Forced child labor is our allegation. It's in the Chinese speaking community, and that's a good niche for us because I speak Chinese. I have the cultural competency to handle these kinds of cases. So that's probably like poster child for the kinds of cases that we're interested in. We do like the corporate misconduct cases as well. And one of the cases that we're investigating right now is a class action against insurance company. No China angle, all the themes that Joe was talking about, just nickel and diming consumers in surreptitious, hard to detect ways that for an individual would be not worth their time to file a lawsuit over, but the cumulative impact is huge and the money being taken out of consumers' pockets is quite large. And that's the types of cases that we are trained on as Cohen Milstein. My partner Adam is an expert in antitrust, so we're developing quite a few antitrust cases. I won't say what they are because we're still investigating them.
Because I might steal them.
There you
No,
go.
kidding.
And we can talk inside baseball about the plaintiffs bar later if you want, but I guess
Definitely.
that's maybe a different episode.
Hey, Times, focusing on the China angle for a second, do you
Yeah,
want to talk a little bit about what your footprint is in this space, how you got there, and some of the work that you've done
sure.
over the past few years on a particular side of this debate?
Yes. So a little bit of background about my family. My father's side of my family is from mainland China, grew up under Mao, and my father is a fairly well-known Chinese pro-democracy activist and is now actually a political prisoner, has been in prison in China for his pro-democracy activism for over 2 decades. I was a teenager when that happened, and that really informed a lot of my worldview, my reasons for becoming a lawyer in the first place. Then I went to NYU with you, Evan, got a shit ton of student debt, realized I need to pay this debt off, and so ended up working in the big law world. But I always was trying to find a way back into the China stuff. And as it happens, learning how to litigate complex cases on contingency turned out to be a way to do that because there are a lot of claims. There are a lot of injured people, Chinese speaking people who can't afford lawyers. Some of them have good claims, and it just takes an enterprising litigator willing to take risk and who knows their culture and background to do those cases. And so we have a couple of cases against the People's Republic of China itself. The clients here are protesters. They're from China. They experienced pretty horrible corruption that led to the loss of their business in China to the tune of millions of dollars. Basically, their businesses were confiscated or stolen from them with the help of judicial corruption. They can't get redress in China. They come to the United States and they protest in front of the Chinese embassy or the Chinese ambassador's residence in DC to try to obtain redress. And in the case of my clients, they were assaulted by members of the Chinese diplomatic staff. They came out of the ambassador's residence onto US soil and assaulted my clients, and in one case, causing pretty serious permanent injuries. And as it turns out, under the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act, they have a cause of action against the Chinese government itself. So that's, as Adam would call that, a Times Wang special, which I think is pretty appropriate. So we have a couple of cases like that.
Todd, I have a question for you, a little
Sure.
off topic. I'm just curious. I spent my career as a private lawyer mainly on the defense side, mainly representing corporate entities, some of whom were doing good things, some of whom were doing not such good things. But I'm curious, like for you, it sounds like you do some work in sort of the class world where, yeah, you have a physical human client, but you're really representing an amorphous mass of people. And then you have a lot of cases where you really have a person who something horrible has happened to, and you are trying to get redress for them. For you personally, how do you feel differently about those different styles of cases? Do you have a preference of one over the other, or are you sort of like you can see the big picture and how the more amorphous client still is leading to positive outcomes for real people?
To be perfectly honest, I much prefer the more impersonal cases. I'm in my head a lot. I think about this systemic things and the individual clients, there's just a lot more emotion. There's a lot more emotion involved, and that's not it's not my strong suit. It's not my preference, but someone's got to do the work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Times, based on your background, and Joe, you as well, each of you presumably come in with institutional biases, hypothesis as to how something's going to go. Do you always stick to one side of an issue one party versus the other? Is this kind of party politics? Or do you ever come around to the other side, the less intuitive side, and say, in this instance, there is no there, and the other side might be the side that's not more generally aligned with your own beliefs, and take that side?
Well, let me give two answers, one on behalf of my company and one on behalf of myself. For Hunterbrook, we are a journalism company at our core, despite all these other things we do. It doesn't mean we can't have a view, but it's absolutely imperative for us to hear all sides of the issue, to understand all sides of the issue, and to report all sides of the issue. That doesn't mean we can't bring a perspective to bear on it. It just means what it means practically, right, is if we're reporting on a company that we think is doing something wrong, we will call that company up and say, here's what we're hearing. What do you have to say about that? Please,
Mhm.
period. Without exception, we have to do that. And, do the same thing for anybody else, regardless of what we think their perspective is going to be, if their perspective is relevant to the story. Personally, I have a strong bias. I believe deeply that there are real power dynamics in society, and two people that walk into a room it's not a blank slate. It never is. And so I have more of an affinity for the less powerful. And I'm more inclined, it doesn't mean I think everything somebody says is always right because of the social context, but it means that when I'm thinking about where to spend my time and energy, I want to do that on behalf of people that otherwise would not have other options. And so that's sort of how I think about the dynamic. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
But Joe, I read an article about you guys recently. What stuck out to me was, sure, there are situations where the trading arm might be shorting a stock that y'all believe was engaged in corruption, but the inverse is also true. Sometimes you'll take the other side of that as well. Can you walk us through those instances?
Yes, 100% that's true. Just going back to what I said at the beginning, separating my personal feelings from how we operate as a company. As a company, we follow the facts, right? And it's not uncommon for the newsroom to start looking at a company. We might get a tip that says, hey, I know this company is under SEC investigation, right? This is a real one that happened. And we say, oh, that's interesting. Let's go look at that. I mean, it was publicly known that the company was under investigation, and the market was sort of like, oh, SEC investigation, this must be a bad company. Stock drops, right? We start looking at the company because we're interested in it for other reasons. It's a security company, it's implicated in
Mm.
school safety and other newsworthy topics. We dig in, and what we realize is we called up all the company's clients and we said, hey, this company is under investigation. They've announced it. How does that make you feel about them? And these are schools, right? Mostly schools and venues and things like that. This is a security system for keeping weapons out of schools. And they all said, are you kidding me? This company is the best thing that's ever happened to us. We
Mm.
would never cancel our contract with them. We need them. I can point you to 5 incidents in the last year where we might have had serious harm happen if not for these sensors. And hearing that over and over and over again puts the $300,000 SEC fine in perspective, right? And
Yeah.
whereas often people will react to the headline, we try to dig deeper and understand the real story. And what we came out of in this case is feeling like that's is actually a really good company that made a footfall, and as we all do. And so, yes, that is normal. And I just want to mention this is happening less and less, but people often group us in the activist short seller category. Activist short sellers don't reach out to the company to get their perspective on
Right.
what we're reporting, right? Activist short sellers don't have a 40-page guideline of journalistic ethics that is taken extremely seriously. And the other half of my job, in addition to running the litigation business, is being the newsroom lawyer and making sure we're doing things the right way. And I spend at least half my day, if not more, fielding those kinds of queries from the reporters. I don't think the activist short sellers are doing that. Maybe they are. The question is, does your mind ever change? Like you get a tip, and does your mind
Sure.
ever change in the course of the investigation? Absolutely. Almost inevitably. Almost inevitably, what you think you're going to find when you go in is not what you do find. I think, sadly, often what you find is way worse than what you thought you were going to find. And that's a little bit depressing. But it is nice when every once in a while You go in thinking you're going to find some shady business, and what you actually find is a bunch of well-meaning people working really hard to do something good in the world.
Sure. At times, you presumably come into this with a strong feeling about party politics as it pertains to China. Do you ever take the other side of, cross the picket lines effectively and argue in the other direction?
Well, in a sense, yes. Let me put it this way. I do not subscribe to the view that my enemy is my friend. Shen Yun is a perfect example. They are definitely persecuted by the Chinese Communist Party. They are definitely allies in the sense that they are perhaps even more anti-CCP than I am. Doesn't mean that I'm not going to sue them if they use forced child labor. That's nonsense. Yeah.
Um, Shifting bases a little bit. I mean, look, all these concepts sound great in theory, right? But each of you come with a commercial background. You spent quite a bit of time at big law firms, paying down student debt and the like. In your role right now, or where your organizations are at, is it possible to do well while doing good as well? And in particular, what sensitivities do you guys have towards monetizing the important work that you're doing?
Yeah. I mean,
At times.
this is on my mind daily. It is possible. It's definitely possible. It's harder. If you don't care about doing good, that's one less constraint and you can just be a mercenary. But if you add that constraint, yeah, then the universe of cases that you're going to be willing to do, it shrinks. But it is definitely possible. I would say for us, the critical skill or the critical ability, and this is true of plaintiffs, contingency lawyers, I think generally, it's knowing what cases to say no to. Everybody has a sob story. You can't help everyone. We could have been a charity. We've chosen not to be a charity, and that choice, has implications. So I say no way more than I say yes. And yeah, we have to think a lot about damages. What are the available damages? Is there fee shifting, collectability? I would say the other thing to make this line of work is you have to be an excellent litigator. Kind of goes without saying, or it's table
Yeah.
stake.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think not only is it possible, I think everybody should be doing it. I think the world would be a better place. We're in a slightly different position as a company because certainly we're trying to do good. Certainly we are trying to do well and have done well. I mean, we were profitable our second year, which for a media startup is unheard of.
Yeah.
And then there's even a bigger lens that we think about a lot, which is we operate in a time when we consider the fourth estate and the press to be an indispensable component of a democratic and self-governing society, right? If people are going to govern themselves, they have to know what the fuck is going on, and the press is the way that they know it. And I'm not saying that the press always does the best job or that there aren't serious issues, but I think theoretically, at least, it's an absolutely indispensable component of democracy. The press is also, over the last 15 to 20 years, been completely decimated economically and then as a functioning entity by social media and other factors. At the same time as we are trying to do good on like a story by story, case by case basis and do well as a individual company, we are also trying to develop a model that potentially can be deployed, maybe not exactly the way we've done it, but variations on the theme can be deployed more broadly to strengthen the institutional press in this country, which we think is a like overarching goal that is bigger than any one case or any one story. And so that puts another frame on the sort of do well or the do good portion of this. In addition to our fund and our law firm and our newsroom, we have a nonprofit where if we do have a good year and we make money, some portion of that money goes to the nonprofit and we fund local journalism. That's sort of our literal put your money where your mouth is thing on trying to strengthen the entire ecosystem.
Well, look, each of you grapple with free speech, right? These are issues presumably in the subject matters that each of you deal with. How is free speech center to the types of litigation and the types of stories that each of you guys are covering?
I can go first as the free speech lawyer. For me, I've mentioned a couple of times I wear two hats, and it's hard sometimes to switch between them. But putting on my newsroom lawyer hat in sort of a defensive posture, I'm obviously every day vetting stories, reading stories. Just earlier today, I won't give any details, but a reporter called me up. And by the way, it's only 10:30 in the morning, and this has already happened earlier today. So reporter calls me up and he says, "Hey, I've obtained a leaked recording of a phone call. Can we publish it?" And I won't give you guys any of the details of who it is or what it is. You'll have to read Hunterbrook to find that out. Friday, the article is dropping. But that is a free speech issue, right? Like, what does a news organization have to know before it can make a decision about whether to publish a leaked audio recording? There are wiretapping laws, there are defamation laws, there are a host of ways in which a person who is recorded and doesn't want that recording disseminated can take umbrage and try to do something about it. And so it's an everyday thing. And that's one example, but more broadly, there is a constant, especially in the current climate, working in a media company where two things are happening. One, rhetorically, the media is being vilified primarily by Trump and acolytes, but also by people on the left, and is seen as quote unquote the enemy. Two, far more litigation is being brought against media companies for defamation primarily, but other things as well. And three, the First Amendment guardrails that have existed in the law since the 60s are under severe and sustained attack to the point where multiple Supreme Court justices have basically come out and said, we want to get rid of New York Times versus Sullivan, which is the primary legal protection for reporting on public figures. All that is happening. And what that means is when you sit in my seat and you're a newsroom lawyer, and all this is going on, and a story comes and it's incendiary and sensitive, and it may be well reported and well sourced and well supported, you get scared. Like the chilling effect. You hear this in the law, this term, a chilling effect, and you read some dry case book and you're like, what the fuck does that mean? What is it? I'm not cold. It's the middle of summer. What is this chilling effect? And what I'm describing is the chilling effect, and it is real. And I feel it every day. And it's incumbent on me to be as clear-eyed as I can, to have my judgment as clear as it can be, and make the call on whether to publish something, not from a place of fear, but from a place of, on my judgment, is this true? Have we supported this? Is this ethically right to publish and newsworthy, and all of the other actual considerations that should go into publishing a piece, not am I going to get sued for this? And it's a real thing. And I can tell you, I won't name names, but I know big, huge, multi-billion-dollar media companies are pulling stories every day because of fear. And I know that because I know all their lawyers and I talk to them and I know specific situations where it's happening. Some of them get reported, many of them do not. But when I say reported, sometimes there is reporting on stories that have been pulled, like, for example, Google CBS and anything that's been written about CBS News in the past couple weeks. But the vast majority of it is not like some powerful figure calls up the head of CBS News and says, you can't run 60 Minutes. The vast majority of it is some reporter at some publication has a story, and the editor or the newsroom lawyer is like, this is a great story, but we don't have the resources to deal with a potential lawsuit, and we know this subject of this story is litigious. We just can't take the risk right now. And that's fucking scary. But that is happening every day.
Conj, free speech presumably touches you not just in litigating these cases that you're litigating, but also in the very actions of your clients or putative clients. Why don't you talk a little bit about how you think about free speech in the particular context of these Chinese cases?
Well, let me just share with you, this is like a daily problem for me, the fear problem
Yeah.
that Joe was talking about. I mean, you want to see what it will look like if it keeps in America, if it keeps going down this path. I can tell you because that's the way it is in mainland China. Fear is unbelievably powerful. It's unbelievably silencing. To give you an example, in some of my cases, I'm looking for expert witnesses, and my ideal expert would be Chinese speaking, would have the cultural competency in the background. But I can't begin to tell you how many have looked at who's on the other side of the case and said, "Sorry, I can't do it. I have family in China, or I would like to go to China someday. even my friends, some of my friends who are lawyers, who are like China heads, who don't like the CCP, some of them have said, can't help you, can't work with you because they're afraid. They're Americans, you know. So that fear, yeah, that chilling effect, it's not just a dried word in law books, it's a real thing. There is an interesting free speech dynamic to a couple of cases that one of them may go to trial and the other ones we're going to be moving for damages. The protester cases I told you about, you know, the fact pattern there is you have a foreign totalitarian government assaulting people exercising their First Amendment rights on US soil. And my intuition is that should lend itself to significant punitive damages because free speech is such a core value. So I've been thinking a lot about that and trying to find a case. I think about it from the plaintiff side, damages for violations of free speech.
Our common thread here is we're all litigators, right? And a substantial part of our practice is looking to the courts for redress for these types of issues. How would each of you comment on that? And what role do you each think about the courts having for dealing with what we're dealing with now politically and in terms of free speech?
This is a thought I had more broadly about the practice of holding corporations accountable for corporate misconduct. It was interesting because when Trump first came to power, it was a populist moment that I thought might actually be kind of good or okay for my line of work because you saw this weird political alignment. You saw, conservatives starting to criticize big business for various types of corporate misconduct, which is very different from the Bush years, right? So I thought that populist moment, you know, it didn't outweigh the fact that Trump is like a wannabe dictator and is bad for democracy. But selfishly, I was thinking about, oh, like my little plaintiff side firm, maybe it'll be okay. But actually, in the 10 years since Trump first came to power, now I'm getting the feeling that that populism might have been overblown. And I'm starting to get the feeling that it's sort of back to business as usual in terms of big business being able to just overwhelm the little guy in courts, both at the level of law, doctrine, and judicial philosophy, and just resources.
Yeah, I have similar thoughts. I think we're living in a time of almost unparalleled, or actually, I think I've read completely unparalleled. We're living in a have and have not world. And I don't think the courts are well positioned to address that larger problem, whether it's in the context of hot button political issues that are brought in front of courts that have implications for that, or, you know, consumer class actions that are about holding the powerful to account to the less powerful. The court's role in our society is to, rather than go out and have a fist fight, we can get an answer to a disagreement in a more civilized way. And the courts are, that's what they're for to me. And that's what they're very good at. And I think they continue to be very good, inefficient, but overall good and fair at resolving individual disputes. And I think that the courts, while imperfect, have held up, I think, probably better than any other institution in our society in the face of sort of the massive, I'll use the word changes that are going on. And so I'm proud of both the federal and state judiciary. I think that where in many areas, kind of ethical and long-standing prudential norms have just gone out the window at the drop of a hat, I think the courts have maintained them much better than most other institutions, and I'm proud of my judge friends. But I don't think the courts are well positioned to solve big problems. I think they're well positioned to solve individual problems. And my hope is that will continue to be the case. I do think that, to echo times, I think the problems that sort of stem from inequality, which are to me corruption, mistreatment, the powerful getting over on the powerless, are worse than ever. And I think a lot of the organs of accountability have been hollowed out. And, Hunterbrook, that's what we want to do. right? We want to report, but what we actually want to do is hold people accountable. And that for us, that's why we have a law firm. That's why we have an investment fund, because these are like, yes, they are imperatives for us to make money, and the money funds more journalism and we can grow and do more of it. And that's incredibly important. But really, what it's about is not finding something wrong, writing a story about it and putting it out in the world and then moving on. It's finding something wrong, writing a story about it, putting it out in the world, and working to make it better. Working for accountability, working for restitution for people that have been harmed. And that's our perspective. And I think there is a shitload of work to do.
Yeah, if I could just make a comparative point and to end this on a positive note, one thing that I've learned thinking about and visiting China so much is that the downside is that I thought that I was going to become a lawyer and contribute to the democratization of China through the rule of law. And what I realized was that is backwards, that law is downstream from politics. Here and everywhere, politics comes first and shapes the legal environment. But to end on a positive note, the work that Joe and I do is only possible because, at least for now, we still have the rule of law. And especially if you spend a lot of time in a place like China, to me, it still feels kind of like magic that as long as I have the facts on my side and the statute or case law, whatever is, the principle is there that supports my case. I can be like any Joe Schmo off the street and sue the fucking president of the United States and win. That is a kind of a magical thing that's still possible in our country for now. It's worth keeping in mind.
Well put.
Awesome, guys. I want to thank you each for joining the podcast today. Listeners, thank you for tuning in today. Looking forward to the next episode. Thank you and be well.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Read Hunterbrook.